Ms. Laurel Van Horn. Laurel Van Horn has specialized in accessible travel and tourism since 1987, working as a writer, educator, and consultant. For the past 9 years, she has been the program director-editor for Open Doors organization, the Chicago-based nonprofit best known for its nationwide studies of the disability travel market. In addition to developing customer service training for airlines and service companies, ground transportation companies, cruise lines, and hotels, Laurel edits Odio's Easy Access Guides. A resident of New York City, Laurel has an MA in economics from the New School for Social Research and a BA from Bryn Mawr College. Laurel.
Thank you, Jay. First of all, I have to fall on my sword. That's my first order of business because I'm supposed to be presenting our new 2014 study today, and unfortunately, we had a problem with our people in the field, and they gave me back a panel which really wasn't to my liking, and now we're going back into the field actually in the next week or so. So you as attendees will all get the full information later. So the study should be out before the end of the year, but after waiting 10 years to do this study, I certainly was not going to put out something that I wasn't happy with. So in talking to people the last couple days, it seems pretty clear to me that a lot of people don't know what Open Doors organization is. We're a small nonprofit. We're based in Chicago. We really have focused more on people with disabilities as consumers and specifically within travel and tourism than on any other part of it. So we don't do employment very much, although of course that's probably the last frontier for people with disabilities. We were founded by Eric Lipp, who's our director. After, at the age of 30, he suddenly found himself more or less flat on his back. He had a tumor on his spine, and wound up in a wheelchair for a year or so before he finally was able to begin walking again. When he was trying to come out of rehab in Chicago, he couldn't get in the doors of restaurants. And he got really angry. He is a person who does have a good temper, but instead of suing people, he decided that businesses really needed some help. So, you know, that's how we really got started in working with Open Doors. So we do a lot of different things. We primarily work in aviation. We do all kinds of training, both webinars and classroom. We train the complaint resolution officials who are the experts for the airlines for probably 40 or 50 foreign carriers flying in and out of the U.S. We, a couple years ago, started a certification program for all those people who push wheelchairs in the airports. The concept is that we're trying to get standardized service, good qualified people to provide a service which is more or less standardized so that you know what to expect as you go from airport to airport. So we've rolled that out. We also train airports. We just got a contract to do the training for Philadelphia. So we're really trying to raise awareness in all parts of aviation. We also have had a major part in reducing the damage to wheelchairs in the U.S., but also to some extent overseas. We are the first people that ever really went in to train ramp crew on what did wheelchairs look like, the different types, how do you handle them, and how do you reduce damage. We just held our 2 events, Universal Access in Airports and the Airline Symposium in Chicago a couple weeks ago. What it does is bring the whole industry together to talk about the issues that are still a problem, and also to share best practices and look forward to what kind of technologies we should be introducing and so on. Another thing we do are airport accessibility audits, because still there are a lot of issues in airports with accessibility, so we try to help airports out. We often travel to train foreign carriers, and then while we're there, we spend time with them to walk their airport and make recommendations for the things they could change, short, medium, and long term. Another aspect of our work is with cruises. Often people are trained while they're on the ship. and videos are important, so we do shoot videos for a number of major cruise companies. One of the important ones we did a couple years ago was on emergency evacuation. And I had the pleasure of being the evacuation dummy that day and getting carried up and down endlessly, and I wore those guys out, I have to say. I've lost a few pounds since then. And again, we do the cruise ship audits. We'll go and measure, I think for Celebrity, I think I measured every inch of a couple of their ships. And other people would go to dinner, and I would quick run into their stateroom to see if it was a left transfer toilet or a right transfer toilet, and if the grab bars were where they should be, and so on. So the cruise industry is working really hard on this topic. They're not fully regulated. I actually sat on that committee in Washington, and that was, gosh, 15 years ago, maybe.
It's more than that.
And we're still, gosh, don't remind me.
Yeah.
And we're still waiting. I always say that on my tombstone, it's going to say PVAC, still waiting. But anyway, so this is one of our consultants that we often work with, Candace Cable, talking to one of the Royal Caribbean staff during the video. Ground transportation. One of our big projects was Amtrak. We trained about 8,000 people for them nationwide a few years ago. I do an ADA motor coach program, which we've trained in virtually every state now. That's an industry that they've got the lifts now. We have 100% accessibility for the large carriers, but they're not advertising at all. They're not marketing. You can go on people's websites, and you would not know that 100% of their fleet is accessible. It's frustrating. A new initiative for us is taxis. We're now the centralized wheelchair accessible vehicle dispatch for Chicago. That started about a year ago. So we're doing taxi driver training, and our newest partnership was with Uber, because I'm sure you've heard in the news that the disability community has not been so happy with lack of accessibility, lack of training for this rideshare service. So what we're doing is rolling out Uber Access and Uber Assist. We've started in Chicago. I believe Houston, Washington will be coming online. Uber Access is accessible vehicles. So there are many people out there in the U.S. and elsewhere who have a vehicle for a family member. If they want to become an Uber driver and go through the training, they can use their vehicle now to generate an income for themselves. So, and it's also a benefit for people in the community, because as we know, even in major cities, there are very few taxis. Uber Assist is for Uber X drivers, and it provides training on, how do you fold somebody's wheelchair to put it in the trunk, how do you guide somebody who's blind, how do you communicate with someone who's deaf, and so on. So it's the disability awareness training that we would do for any other part of the industry. Another project is access guides. We have 2 currently, and we will be adding a 3rd in Rockford, Illinois. Easy Access Chicago is the first, Easy Access Springfield the second, and I see that Bonnie Lukowitz is in the audience here. She has Access Northern California. When I started these guides, I based them on hers, and I always think you should, stand on other people's shoulders, and that's the way to move forward. So her guides are great. We gather all this information, on site, and we make sure that it is updated on a regular basis. The last thing to mention is Odio Academy. I've developed tons of training since I started back in the 80s, and a lot of it is just sitting. So what we're going to be doing is creating webinars and online training, and all these things will be gathered into one Odio Academy. My partner on that is actually based here in Montreal, so I'll be meeting with him this week and getting started on that project.
Your slides are not changing.
I'm not changing? Oh God, I'm changing the ones in front of me here. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. So, about our market studies. We were the first ones to really do these nationwide studies on travelers with disabilities, and we did them in 2002 and 2005. What we found is results were very similar for the two. 70% of adults with disabilities were traveling over a 2-year period. They were taking 2 trips on average during that period. The annual spending on travel, which is what got us into the New York Times and kind of helped put us on the board, was $13.5 billion US annually. spent just on travel by people with disabilities. We found that there was also a frequent flyer segment, with 20% of adults traveling 6 or more times over the 2-year period. And people were also traveling internationally. 16% of them had gone outside the continental U.S. over the 2-year period. And that was an aggregate of 3.5 billion U.S. Just on international spending. These details are really on our website with a lot more information on that study. If you're not familiar with it, the website is just Open Doors with an S, NFP.org. So Open Doors, NFP.org. NFP is not for profit. And I'll also show it on the screen at the end. So our 2014 study, we're going to be using the same methodology. God, I'm going to give this to you. All right. I can't see this screen down here. That's what my problem is. They got us in these kindergarten chairs, so it's I'm peering. So we're using the same methodology. We're going to be looking at frequency, purpose, spending, modes of travel, booking methods, destinations again. And we're going to be, again, it'll be air travel, ground transportation, hotels and motels, restaurants, and we have expanded questions this time on cruising. What we're also doing is looking more intently at technology, mobile technology and apps, what are you using the internet for, and so on, because technology is really, really important. And what we're finding is that there's a lag. In the United States, at least, people are waiting for the government to regulate, which is, and the rest of my talk is going to be on this issue, that we don't need to wait. We need to move. We need to be where our customers are. The study is going to be coming out before the end of the year, and I will make sure that you each get the information that I would have presented today. So, as I was saying, in the U.S., we still don't have a regulation to say that people have to have accessible websites. However, the Department of Justice just came down with a big lawsuit against H&R Block, which is the online tax returns company. And so the Department of Justice is saying even though they don't have a standard, that they are going to start fining people if they don't make their sites accessible. So in the meantime, the Department of Transportation has decided that the airline websites do have to be accessible. So by December 2015, that's going to be, you know, the main parts of those sites do have to be accessible. So we are starting to move forward a bit with regulation, but it's important that everybody who's got a website, who's got a mobile app, should make it accessible so that you're not missing out on that part of the market. We've got really interesting technology projects going on now at Open Doors organization, and I'm going to talk about these two things that we're working on. One is a wayfinding in airports project under the Airport Cooperative Research Program, which is part of the Transportation Research Board. Our objective is to create a guidebook for airports on wayfinding for older people and people with disabilities. This is an 18th-month project, so in a couple years from now, you should be seeing this guide. To do this, we're working with some amazing people. The lead on it is an architectural firm, Gresham Smith and Partners, and we're working closely with IBM. With IBM, Open Doors is developing an app for wayfinding in airports. We're using Wi-Fi mapping, which means you don't have to put up any beacons in the airport, so you don't have to install anything. Instead, you're mapping based on where the Wi-Fi signals are around you. So you can triangulate in order to very closely locate where someone is. And what we'll do is we'll map an airport and have this, we're supposed to have this thing ready by January. So we'll be testing that. We'll be creating audits for airports on wayfinding, specifically on different disabilities. So there'll be one related to cognitive, one hearing, vision, mobility, and so on. So the concept is that airports will create accessible databases, which will include the mapping. Then people can go in and develop apps based on that. and people will be able to find their way independently around airports. Because what we're finding is that it's not just the long distances to the gates, it's how do you find your way to your gate. And even, you know, without any disability at all, if it's an unfamiliar airport, often signage doesn't really do the trick. So we start from the basis of universal design, and then we build in some technology and some signage that is going to work for everybody. So this is really exciting, and I got to go down to the IBM labs in Austin and hang out with all these brainiacs for 3 days, and it was really impressive. The other one has to do, the other project we're working on now has to do with accessible transportation in transit. So the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration have teamed up and have this new project called ATTRI, Accessible Transportation Technologies Research Initiative. And it's looking at smart technology in transit. And what we're trying to do for them is to find out what user needs are. So we're going to be running a series of workshops and webinars to look at each different type of disability again, as well as veterans with disabilities and older adults. And then based on this, our findings, then they will develop and roll out various programs. What we see in the U.S. is that some cities are really, really good. Like Chicago, you can get the real-time transit information. At the bus stop, there's visual and audible for you know, when buses will be arriving. One thing we still need is something to, if you're blind, to tell you what bus is actually, you know, approaching the stop. But again, we're working with great people. Battelle is a well-known research organization, and then we're working with Texas A&M on that. So again, 18 months, so you know, I'm busy. This is exciting stuff. So in the rest of this, how much time do I have?
Like a minute and a half.
Okay, I'm going to run to the end of this then. Okay, what we found in our market study was that 51% of travelers had booked something online with their travel. They were booking online. They were using the internet for you know, things related to their disability, finding accessible hotels and so on. This was more than the general population. So we're looking forward to seeing those numbers. But if you're interested in how many people with disabilities are actually using technology, there's a great study from Rehabilitation Engineering Research Center for Wireless Technologies. It's a survey of user needs. They just did one again in 2012, 2013. And I'm going to flip to the chase here.
Minutes. You take a couple. We're
good?
We're short one panelist, so yeah.
Okay. So what they did is a survey that cuts across the board in the U.S. So it's a little bit predominantly female, but we've got people in all age ranges from 18 to 89. The mean age was 51, which is a bit high because we cut off everybody who is 18 and under. And again, it's across the state, so we've got 1/3 of the people in urban areas, almost 1/2 in suburban areas, and 19 in rural areas. And then, you know, we again have a range with employment. Full-time 38%, part-time 15%, retired 20%, non-employed 27%. So again, we've got, you know, it's got a good spread of people in and outside the workforce. And then, without reading all of this part, all I'm showing on the slide is that there were people represented with all different types of disabilities, from the physical disabilities to hearing, vision, manual dexterity, things like anxiety and worry, difficulty speaking, difficulty using arms, and so on. And then they broke out, because it's important how we use technology based on our abilities, people who are blind and low vision, and then deaf and hard of hearing. So what they wanted to look at was how many people in the disability population use technology versus the general population. And it came out very, very close. The Pew study, which was looking at the general population, was 87%. Their sample found it was 93%, which actually was including not just smartphones, but also tablets. So the Pew study just looked at smartphones. So really, there was neck and neck on that. There wasn't really any difference. And then they looked what kind of cell phone or tablet people actually owned. But I don't really need to talk about that. Okay. So then the issue was, you know, so there's no divide in terms of disability. Is there a divide in terms of income? And the left column there says no wireless device. And there's basically no pattern from people less than $10,000 to people $75,000 or over. So no matter where you fell in the income group, you still had some kind of wireless technology. What you do see, however, is that people with a lot more money tended to have fancier devices. So people $75,000 and over are going to have a smartphone. They're more likely to have a tablet. But I always joke, living in New York, that even homeless people have cell phones now. So it might be a basic phone, but I mean, we're all there. And it's great to see that, you know, people with disabilities are certainly there as well. Again, when we look at age, you know, there's an issue of, you know, maybe older people are not using the technology. So if I'm designing all this whiz-bang stuff for wayfinding or for transit, maybe the older people are going to be left out. Well, this is a chart which shows that that's not true. No, up until age 70, everybody, it's about the same. There's like 2 or 3% of people don't have a wireless device. If you're over 70, it's 14%. And still, 14%, that's 86% of those people still do have some kind of technology. So that's pretty amazing. And then when we look at, you know, who's using what kinds of technology based on their disability, there are some patterns that show up. People who have issues with speaking are going to be less likely to be using smartphones and things like that. But to be using the basic phone, they'll be more likely to have a smartphone or a tablet because that's going to be something that can meet their needs in terms of communication. Because you can have storyboard type technologies to be able to communicate. And I'm going to look now at the breakout in terms of hearing and vision. So hearing loss, we see a difference between people who are deaf versus hard of hearing. So people who are deaf are going to need more elaborate technology. They're much more likely to have a smartphone or a tablet. People hard of hearing are going to be able to manage better with just a basic phone or smartphone. And with vision loss, smartphones are obviously really going to be important for people who are blind, less so for people with low vision. You know, with all the technology with voiceover and so on in the smartphone now, it's really an amazing leveler. So just as a recap, at least in the US, there's no technological divide based on disability. Income does play a role in how sophisticated a person's technology will be. You know, richer people are going to have fancier devices. There is a divide based on age, but it's not that much of one as we would expect, and it's people over 70. So it's not the baby boomers, because 70 is kind of the cutoff now where, you know, baby boomers are just turning 70, the front edge of that. So it's people older than that. So, you know, when we think about maybe our parents' generation, they're not into technology, but when we look at the aging group now, they're totally connected, and it's important that we don't forget that. And then, of course, type of disability does play a role. So I wanted to put a quote from Pat Pound, who's our big technology consultant at Open Doors. She's based in Texas and is blind, uses a guide dog. At the airline symposium, we were pushing the airlines now to make their mobile apps accessible. And she said that competitive advantage will never be achieved by meeting government regulations. It will be achieved by meeting your customers where they are. More than 80% of folks who are blind are using mobile devices, and we are desperately trying to use your apps. So I think she got the point home to them. I wanted to present some kind of information today. I think that the stuff on technology is really important for all of us, and that's why I'm presenting somebody else's study for fun. So thank you very much. Again, please contact me if you have any questions, and I'll be sure to get the information out about our new study when it does come out. My email is Laurel, Laurel, @opendoors, nfp.org. Thank you very much.